But I've lived my entire life in Milan other than 4 years of college. So, yes. Parents. My dad has resided where our house is on 199 since the 30s. His grandparents lived on Milan Hill Road, actually what was to become Camp Eton, and is now a private residence. They moved down here during the Depression, bought the place from a family named Gallagher, and at the time there was a dairy barn where we're now talking, and of course some greenhouses. The house was built, the house was there, and a fruit farm. This was an actual fruit farm, dairy, apples on both sides of the road, and it was an apple orchard until the late 50s, early 60s. My dad was a violet grower, and until about the mid 50s he struggled to survive growing those just because fashions changed, they fell out of vogue. He and two other growers began growing anemones, and from the 1950s forward, that was the main floral crop that we grew. And we've managed to maintain a little niche market in that industry. We do our own hybridizing here, we're plant breeders, and our strains have survived, and they're pretty much in demand even today. Went to Red Hook High, graduated in '66, went to college, went to Cornell, graduated in 1970. After that, I came home and started working here full-time, even though I worked all through high school here. So my dad and I formed a partnership, started tearing down the old greenhouses, rebuilding the new ones, adding more glass, expanding production, and 1972 I started to build a house on the farm, and now I reside right on Route 199. I was a justice of the peace for 2 terms. I was on the town board as a councilman for 2 terms. Sat on the Milan grievance board for many years. Always tried to participate at whatever level I could. Being in agriculture, time is at a premium. We typically work 6.5 to 7 days a week here, many times of the year. My interests outside of local government and outside of my job, I've always been active skiing. I've played tennis all my life. So my wife and I both try and keep busy. My wife is still working with IBM, for IBM. She's been there 42 years. Well, one person that I remember, and many people don't, was a lady named Irene Wilcox. And Irene was a close family friend. She was active in the Round Church with my mother and father, and she endowed the church with money, rebuilt the church, rebuilt the parsonage. Right after she completed that project, she came to Tom Odak along with my dad, and with plans to build a town hall on some property that she had purchased and bought. So that beautiful town hall where you guys have your meetings and everything that happens in town is she's largely responsible for that. And then you also have to figure that Wilcox Park is something that she created and endowed and left to the entire county. So Irene, and she was a great lady. She'd come to Sunday dinners, and she had a son named Fred, who unfortunately passed away as a young man in a plane accident. And she really kind of liked me a lot, and she would bring me a lot of the things that were his and gave them to me. Wow. So Irene is a special lady. Well, the big thing that I can notice is when you drive on these secondary roads like Battenfeld Road, like Milan Hill Road, like any road in town, Shookville Road, houses after houses have that growth really. And you don't notice it until the leaves are off the trees and you ride around and you see how many houses have actually been built in town. So that to me is a big change. Another thing, of course, the government has gotten bigger. When I was a judge, I mean, my salary was like minuscule compared to what they're being paid today. I had no court clerk. It was a one-man show, and all different. Our courthouse was down in the basement of the town hall. It's a another thing, when I was a youngster growing up, the siren for this firehouse in Rock City, which is right down the road on Route 199, we only had two firehouses back then. We had that one and we had one in Jackson Corners. And the siren was in my parents' yard on a telephone pole, and it was my mom's job every day at 12 noon to blow the siren as a test. And it was pretty cool because people literally would call her up and say, "Helen, you've got to check your watch, you're a little off, you know." We've had many events. That was very memorable. We had a bad blizzard in 1993 that was crippling. That was a March blizzard, much like the one. And then, of course, the hurricane in 2010. We lost every bridge on our farm, you know. But that was a 100-year storm for this area. So that was major. Other events I remember Sports City, the barn burned down, the old clubhouse. That was a major fire. So there were events, but unfortunately nothing super catastrophic. On the government level, as you look at 20 years, I think you're going to see county consolidation. I think a lot of it won't be, you know, local. You might have, much like they do in other states, they'll probably merge villages and towns, and maybe town governments with one another. As far as growth, and this is a point that's, you know, that I'm dealing with right now with my kids. I mean, because they want to build houses and stuff. Growth is going to be tough. Number one, you're in New York State, where I think more people want to leave than come in, at least at the moment. Number two, so much land is protected, and the cost to subdivide today is astronomical. So how much growth we're going to see? I think we're going to stay fairly rural. I don't see the landscape changing a heck of a lot in the next 20 years. I like the town the way it exists. And think back of, I was trying to think of all the different, my playmate that used to be in town. There used to be the Saunders family on Academy Hill Road. The Thayers lived down on the lower end of Academy Hill Road. They were Red Hook classmates of mine that were in town, and of course the Yodak, and of course Richard Jacoby, Stanley Jacoby. Those were friends that we played with growing up. The Hermanses, Johnny and Dick and Sally and Linda.
Right.
So yeah, we had a lot of good friends, and of course the only local event for kids to do in those days, as far as recreation, you know, we didn't have soccer, lacrosse, this and that. We had a little league for kids from when you were 8. You tried to play Little League, and you could play until you were 12, and you got a uniform, and that was a big deal back then.